What we do now is move into the roundtable. So if I could ask John Cunliffe, Mario Cavestany, Andy McGowan, and John Madelin to just join me up here on the stage. Yeah, there you go. And as I'd hoped, of course, the two Johns are sitting together just to add to a little bit of, just to keep everybody on their toes. Really what I wanted to do in this particular session was to talk a little bit more about the future of the telcos. We heard from Gavin what his perspective was around the industry. We've heard obviously from some of the EDAT DigiWorld analysts and researchers and what their perception is. But I wanted to start really by digging perhaps a little bit more deeply and getting your gentlemen's views on this future scenarios, the three outlooks that we were talking about: commoditization, enhanced connectivity, connectivity plus, and indeed digital malls. I mean, John Cunliffe, you know, from an Ericsson standpoint, you've probably got some privileged access into some of these things. So I'm very interested to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I'd like to speak about commoditization because I think, Roland, you mentioned something about the drop in sales, but also the EBITDA effect. And I think with commoditization, you've got a couple of choices. You scale up, you slim down. Of course, you can go for niches, but I don't think we're interested in that. So in terms of scaling up, I think I'd like to just remind people of what a great success 4G has been. I mean, 4G has been adopted by China, the US, obviously Europe. With that, we've got an absolutely global platform that's given us scale. So whatever we do in the future, we must go for that scale. And I think that's really important in terms of what we do with 5G and the decisions which are going to be made over the next 5 years. Another way of scaling up is I think we get too obsessed about national boundaries. I don't think we do enough as an industry in terms of thinking about how we can deliver service from one country into other countries and get the same sort of benefits of scale that we get in the USA, that we see in the USA. So some thinking there. And then on slimming down, one of the things we've got at the moment is multiple ways of delivering voice. We've got the traditional old POTS, circuit switch voice service. We've got numerous ways of over-the-top delivery and so on. So we probably ought to be thinking about the days when we can eventually switch off that fixed voice service. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but the cost of running it is actually very, very expensive. And to deliver voice over IP is very, very cheap. So I think we need to start the regulatory journey and start to think about how we might take cost out of delivering voice, take the regulations away, make it a level playing field with the over-the-top players.
So some interesting thoughts there. I mean, Andy, I want to come to you. I mean, Accenture obviously, you know, plays across a whole range of different countries, so you're used to this challenge of how do you provide service across. Just building on some of the things that John was saying there about, you know, perhaps we need to look at how we can provide more services there. What's your take on this?
I think the major theme that you're highlighting in terms of the digital shake-up is right, because even whether it's commoditization, whether it's connectivity plus or the digital mall, all of them have a digital shake-up. So in the commoditization, we're starting to see automation, we're starting to see new technologies come in. So you can't stand still in that scenario. And then what we're seeing is them building on top of each other. So as people rotate their businesses, they're using connectivity plus and the platform revolution we're seeing. So software-defined networks and network function virtualization is meaning that networks are now getting both a horizontal scale as well as trying to provide for those industry services. That industry focus starts to get you into connectivity plus, but I think where we're really seeing the bold CEOs and the companies that are doing well is where they're being decisive in the digital mall and they're making decisions and taking priority calls. I think Gavin this morning gave a very good example of taking a bold decision around BT Sport to get into that business, taking a bold decision with EE around everything everywhere. And I think increasingly what we'll need to see is people prioritizing those decisions, deciding who they're going to partner with. So I think increasingly it's going to be about ecosystems. As he mentioned, he's embedded Netflix within the BT Sport or in the BT TV offering. So it's not about our clients doing everything, it's about those ecosystems and partnerships. And we've called it very much the we economy, and the we economy is about being part of that digital fabric, which is about alliances, ecosystems, but also personalizing services back to individuals and kind of the internet of me. So I think it's It's quite persuasive, and I think the digital shake-up, building on the commoditization point, getting that commoditization to create the scale, but also the P&L capacity to allow you to rotate and grow your business.
Mm-hmm. And John, from a Verizon standpoint, we alluded a little bit to the sort of way in which Verizon operates across the United States and some perhaps of the different approach that you can adopt there. But I mean, having listened to what we've been talking about this morning, what's your take on all of this?
Actually, I started out at BT, so very familiar surroundings for me, and it's very interesting to have lived in a mothership of a BT headquarters here in the UK, and then to operate as part of a satellite, because I share the views here from John that we're having to think global and act local a little more. And as you navigate the sort of, is it commoditization, is it digital more, is it connectivity, and there was an interesting horizontal there about customer relationship and direct relationship. I always shudder a bit when I see marketing in my title. It's a relatively new job for me, and my job actually is to work out how we get to 2025 and how we're thriving when we get there. And it is about getting much, much closer to our customers. And Gavin was also talking about the link between our B2B and our B2C. And our customers are telling us that to be relevant in driving value from the connections, in other words, monetizing not just the network, but the platform and the integration with the platform, we need to get into their business and we need to help them innovate in a much more directly customer-led way. So it's about making those connections as the boundaries blur.
Mm-hmm. So making the connections, that sounds to me like a requirement for perhaps some different skills from the ones that perhaps the telcos have had in place. And Maria, you and I were talking earlier about this whole issue of skills and the cyclical nature of all of this. I mean, from an IBM standpoint, do you believe that the skills exist within the telcos to do what some of these things that we're talking about, or do they have to go out and be much more aggressive in terms of partnering and so on to be effective?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. And I have the feeling that we have been here before, working on these scenarios as we were with Idat, working for the 2015, 7 years ago. So we're here now, noticing that. And yes, it's a lot about the skills. It's a lot about the skills. Yes, they are not fully ready for them. Yes, the ones that are understanding the equation are changing dramatically. No surprise, we are also changing ourselves. We live in this industry as well in IBM, and we are going through our new revolution right now, and it's all about the skills. We are celebrating today precisely 21st months of a new reskilling platform in the company that we are using with many service providers, leveraging on interactivity, leveraging on digital design. This is the new world of getting closer to the customer experience. So I agree with John, big time. The differentiation these days between the usual faster, cheaper, and better is on the better, and the better is experience, and the experience is understanding the client, and understanding the client is makes you develop, makes you build new sorts of skills. Then this is not easy. Some of them are doing it already. Surprise, surprise, are the ones that are succeeding and are closer to the digital model. That is, I believe, the aspiration. None of them want to be in the commoditization part. I see this a combination of the second and the third, but you certainly need the skills. The skills very linked also to software. Software is changing the world. I like a lot that word that you have created in your book, that is softwareization. Okay, so this softwareization, and no surprise why we acquired 100 companies in software in the last 6 years. So it's all about software, it's all about assets that you will be combining with intelligence on the vertical, so it's all about new skills that you have to develop in many new domains. They have to do the same. Customers are changing in the good sense, because finally they are getting the maturity that we need them to be in B2B, are in B2C. That's why I fully agree also with Gavin on the combination of both. One calls to each other, okay? Because it's a matter of understanding those skills and those levers from one to each other. So,
I mean, one of the key trends that we've highlighted, obviously, in the book is still that content is king. I mean, a lot of the things that we've been talking about here have been how operators have the opportunity to get much closer to the end user, to really understand. I mean, I remember last year when we ran one of these things, really talking about the fact that the mobile operator in particular is probably one of the very few organizations worldwide, with perhaps the notable exception of the NSA, who has who believes they have a right, and indeed I would share that with them, to know exactly where I am at any one single point in time because they're providing me with service. And yet they've been rather slow, one might argue, to capitalize on that opportunity and to be able to drive much more content and value to the end user, unlike the way in which the GAFA organizations have, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. And for me, I suppose that is one of the, what I would term as a sort of a skills or a capability shortage. I don't know, John, what would, how would you respond?
There has been some exploitation of that data. For example, if you are looking at traffic data and so on, a lot of that is extracted in terms of anonymous data from people's phones. Basically, we can detect when the phone's moving on a motorway or not. And so that goes back, gets fed back into the systems that you'll see when you go and look at your Google Maps and TomTom and so on. So there are examples of it being exploited, but I agree with you. I think there's a long way to go yet.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that the telcos the operators have the capability, or John, from Verizon's standpoint, what do you see?
Yeah, I think when we talk about skills, it's skills in terms of our service delivery, and it's also skills in terms of the consumption. And again, I'd say that's both B2C and B2B. I was talking to one customer of ours who said that their average age was 55 and their institutional knowledge was about to walk out the door, and the 55-year-olds couldn't communicate with the millennials that were coming in at the bottom. So, even there, the AOL acquisition that we've recently made is about exploring the boundary between the content subs and the much more intelligent top of the art online adverts. In other words, getting a much more intimate understanding of your end users and making your service much more granular, delivering it at scale and making it feel intimate. And we all need to get there if we're gonna succeed in monetizing the platform.
Mm-hmm. And Andy, Accenture is very active in this space, isn't it, supporting some of its customer base around these sorts of challenges. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing in this area.
Yeah, I think this theme of personalization is prevalent. I think increasingly it's about delivering the right content to the people and recommending content. So a lot of people are investing in those platforms, not just to deliver both mobile and in the house the content, but also personalizing, so you're prompting and delivering things. We're seeing Tony Hall, Director General at the BBC, talk about personalisation of content. You're seeing BT being very specific about the type of content it's acquiring. It's very expensive, so it wants to make sure it's being delivered correctly. But also, I think the ancillary or the intangible benefits for BT in terms of the brand, the culture, the way in which it's changed the image of the company pretty quickly. And I think they clearly demonstrated, as Gavin mentioned, the speed at which they were able to build a studio. And actually, they're the new entrants in the content world, and they can perhaps take on some of the GAFA companies who are not so used to dealing with customer experience and in the way that they have, particularly in country.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting point, Mario, isn't it? Because that really plays to the heart of the opportunity. If we look at the competition that exists between GAFA, who on the one hand do have key insight into what it is that I happen to buy on a daily basis, and yet perhaps can't exploit that as well as from an overall coverage perspective. And then you've got the telcos and operators on the other side who don't have some of that insight. How can we pull those two things together? Do you think we can pull them together? Are we going to see more operators doing the sorts of things that BT's been up to, do you think?
I think we will see more and more. I don't know if all the audience is aware of the GAFA term that you're using in your book that represents Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, and between parentheses Microsoft. GAFA, by the way, in Spain means glasses. So that's a trick, so you can remember very well this. That's why probably I got it so quickly. So GAFA, good. Okay, yeah, we're doing GAFA in IBM, big time. We're doing GAFA in IBM. We have a phenomenal alliance with Apple. Mm-hmm. Phenomenal alliance to redefine jobs and works. We have learned that, look at what has happened in the last 12 months. In less than 12 months, we have done a lot of GAFA, okay, if I may. Facebook for advertising, for profiling our customers. We were talking about that before. So, and they are doing it, of course. Many of them are doing it. Again, the ones that are working on the skills, the ones that are understanding the partnership. So partnership are critical for, in my opinion, for the digital mall. You cannot get there And then that partnership, yes, of course, you will have the ability to do it yourself or buy and do it yourself, like Verizon is doing. But at the same time, I'm sure that you will be selling everything, all the capacity for your clients that will be using other services as well. So you want to be on number 2 and number 3. You want to be the king of connectivity. Yes, you want. You want to be the king of digital mall. Yes, you are. You have to play with the two of them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
No doubt about it. And partnerships are critical for that. So it's really recommendable.
Okay. Before we move on to another theme, any questions from the audience on this particular area that we're covering at the moment? I'd be quite keen to bring some of you in if there's anything that you... Yeah, there's one just over at the back, the gentleman at the back. Sorry, can't hear you.
Okay, you should keep that copywriter. He's good. Joshua Bowersol from Origin Ventures. I've been in this sector for about 20 years, and actually the first job I did was as a lead consultant to Cable and Wireless on their internet strategy. And what I've seen is that the incumbents fail to see the wave until it is upon them. And eventually it comes down to who's the best surfer, right? What I'm astonished by is that there's not a lot of talk here about what I call the Uberization of the economy, right? This, the GAFA thing, for many of the startups I work with, and I work a lot in the Valley and out here, GAFA is past tense already. So they're moving on to what you guys call over the top, and what they call camel nose under the tent services, where they can exploit and leverage the networks that are now more or less public property. And I see that as a huge relevant situation for the incumbents. And I think one of the areas where there's a lot of opportunity is in what people are calling IoT, Internet for Cities. And I'd like to hear what you guys think about that. Because I think that's where you have a natural proclivity and the skills to make that happen. You were just touching on it a moment ago when you were saying how do we connect the data about geolocalization with the user's needs at any point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Andy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think there was a few questions in there. I think firstly you were being unfair on the telcos. I think actually they have adapted well to the broadband, and if you look at broadband internet and you look at the other services they've brought. But I think also I agree with your point that the mega platforms, so the GAFA, are now starting to struggle with big company problems like supply chain, like call centers, like how do you serve customers across multiple regulation. And then you're seeing this birth of hyper-growth companies in industries, so the Uber, the Airbnb examples, but there are many more. You know, some I like are the John Deere now offering services to farmers in terms of being able to optimize their land and be able to deliver services. There's one theatre in Barcelona that now you pay based on how many times you laugh using facial recognition. I think you... but what you're seeing, I think, is that platform revolution from those ubiquitous global platforms into these industry verticals. And I think that's where the digital mall for me comes to life, is how do you take that and create a differentiated service? Because the reality is the GAFA group have not created the revenue and the ARPU that you would expect, and it's well below what the telcos achieve. You look at Uber and others, they're actually delivering services and making real revenue across boundaries. So I think you're right in mixing them. I think, though, what I see typically, and I talk to the GAFA companies and other internet companies about, is once they get to a certain scale, how do they deal with the realities of being big? I see the telcos figuring out how to rotate their business and place bets, and then I see these hyper-growth companies where, you know, we talk a lot about the revenue mix, but actually the valuation mix is important because what these valuations that are being generated based on industry services are huge, and I think we'll see more of that as we go forward.
John, I know you want to come in on that.
Yes, I'd make a comment not just about the Internet of Cities, but of things and such, and about collaboration. We're doing 2 projects with Volvo I'd like to tell you about. The first one is about detecting ice with cars. So cars are very good at detecting ice through their ABS or the traction control systems, and far more sensitive than the little thermometer you normally have on the dashboard. Wouldn't it be good if my car, as I'm driving along, detects ice, wouldn't it be good if I could share that data, that event, with other cars around me, or even the local authorities to come and salt the roads and so on. Well, at the moment, we could only do that with Volvo cars. With collaboration, we could do it with everybody. So I think in this world of interconnected things and cities, we need to collaborate more. Another nice story on the Volvo front is, you know, you order something online and you have it delivered and you're not at home, you've got to go to the post office and pick it up or whatever. Very irritating. So we have a concept of you authorize whoever it is, Amazon for example, Amazon to locate your vehicle, wherever it is, and authorize them to open the boot of your car, the trunk of your car, give them a security code, and let them put the parcel in your car. I think it's those sort of ideas, which we're only just starting on at the moment. We're only just at the beginning. I think we need to be far more creative, not just in our telecoms industry, but the wider industries, about applications of all the connectivity and sensors and information and data that we'll have.
Mm-hmm. And John?
There's a McKinsey phrase that has moved into common use, and I say it may or may not be McKinsey, but coined some years ago, of network orchestrators, which describes exactly what you're talking about. At the time, they studied a company called Li and Fung. You may never heard of them, but actually Li and Fung are probably responsible for 9 out of 10 of the stuff that we're wearing today. Why? Because they're a bunch of people in Singapore who just took it upon themselves to understand the supply side, demand side, and then the provisioning in the middle. So it's a knowledge-based model. It's what the bankers are now calling digitally pure models. That's what Uber, Airbnb represent. By the way, last time I looked, both of those companies between them, their market cap was about $60 billion out of nowhere, completely frictionless. What's Apple's market cap? I think it's about 150 billion. So out of nowhere. And that's the model of the future. And that's why I think we do have a value, because those customers and prospects are telling us that the devil is in the detail of doing this stuff, of making the connections, of making them work. It's about network, platform and services coming together in the context of our business model. And then from our point of view, you know, there's a great saying too, that I know what 2025 is going to look like, but you know, to get there, I wouldn't start from here. And for us to capitalize, you're going to see more incubator models. You know, you'll see with the AOL acquisition, you know, we're going to have Armstrong running that, and it's going to be an incubator, as we've done with Terramark, as we've done with Hughes Telematics in M2M.
Any other questions from? Just one here.
Thanks. Jeremy Cowan from M2M Now magazine. Telcos, amongst others, have been notoriously bad about enabling the interoperability of data in different silos. Some of the models that you've described, gentlemen, have been around smart cities, where we're talking about individual services, not smart cities per se. How can we, as a generation, see that achieved more quickly, the interoperability of all that data? Mario, do you want to have a go at that?
Yeah, why not? As IoT, we just announced an investment of 3 billion in IoT 2 or 3 weeks ago. We absolutely believe in ecosystems. So you have probably heard the term developer's garden. Okay, that we have done with a number of operators, where we are facilitating this ecosystem that will really make all the different parties developing against these systems achieve interoperability. Yes, standards, number one, okay, open systems and ecosystem for developers. That's the name of the game.
Okay. Andy, any?
Yeah, I think that's what you're seeing now. So software-defined networks is a key element of that. Network functional virtualization. So what we're essentially there is the ability to move to an IP world. And as I think the ID book says, this is the greatest change that's coming to the network. It's the equivalent of when we separated the operating systems and the hardware from the applications, but we're doing it in the network space. And that will allow people to access a network, if allowed, to provide services. And then if you connect that, and I think where the telcos have an opportunity to leverage an asset is around their billing asset and their customer service asset. And therefore, those services that you mentioned, being able to provision them real time, being able to bill for them, and then being able to serve them in a very personalized way over that network. You know, that's what people talk about when they talk about software-defined networks. enabling the Internet of Things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One of the things that Vincent was mentioning was this issue around security, of course, and the more we go online, the more we use, the more important security becomes in all of that. And I think he made an interesting point that we've picked up here as well about the difference between, say, the 55-year-olds who are now shuffling off and the millennials and their perceptions on things. It strikes me that as we move to enable much more rich content that is particularly tailored to me, and your Volvo examples, John, are clearly in this space, that we also need to be thinking much more broadly about some of the challenges that places upon things like the cloud, storage of personally identifiable information, where rarely a day goes by that we don't read about that in Europe at the moment. Are these going to be enablers? Are they going to be disenablers? Are they going to slow things down? What's your take, John, from Verizon?
Actually, I'm running off to a little event later this afternoon talking about our data breach report. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a download. It's a public free download, by the way, and we have 70 national governments and commercial entities contribute. So statistically relevant data. And what it tells us is a couple of things. One, actually we're not doing the basics well. And to cut a very long story short, two, security really needs to be default on. It needs to be woven into the fabric of everything that we're talking about for a couple of reasons. One, end users don't care about it and never will. And I've got 18 years in IT security and I wish it were different, but it isn't, and it never will change. And then the second thing, which we're just getting to grips with now, is value. That we take for granted in this whole conversation that we have a clear view of how much all of this content and information is worth, but really we don't. And so get the basics right. We've got to take a step forward in valuing what we're talking about, and it has to be woven in the platform.
Okay. Mario, any comments on that from IBM?
Specific comments other than key to security. Okay, is we opened that line of business after having been so many years on ciphering, deciphering, and Department of Defense, and then that drives many of the actions that we have taken and many of the alliances. So it's again another ecosystem to invest, to watch, and to develop very strongly. It's absolutely needed to earn the confidence of your customers and the trust, and the same as especially talking about video that can build, as it is building loyalty for us quadruple play for many operators around the world. It can kill you if you have a breach, okay, immediately, or if the quality of service, or you have issues with the rights and so on. All that revolves around security. So yes, it's a key, absolutely key ingredient.
Okay, thank you. So a number of themes coming out of that around trust, around loyalty, around really trying to anticipate some needs. But I think the underlying message is that actually for the first in a very long time, we're seeing quite a rich area of potential for operators, and one in which in fact they are starting to take advantage of, which is I think a change from where we were just a couple of years ago when we were talking about, particularly in Europe, some of the challenges that operators were facing. So that's all that we've got time for with the panel. Thank you very much indeed to Mario Cavestany, Andy McGowan, John Cunliffe, and John Madelin.